Perfect. Good morning, everyone. I see lots of people logging in now. Going to give people a couple minutes to get in and get their audio connected. But happy Thursday. It's Thursday, right? Is today Thursday? It's Thursday. I'm reassuring myself. Where I am, it's a little bit gloomy. I don't know what it's like in the areas people are in. Yes, and I see lots of people saying hello in the chat. Please do drop your little hello in the chat. Excellent. All right. I do think that we're going to have some folks logging in a bit later this morning. There's a few things going on in the organization that I know are distracting people a little bit. I'm not sure, Artem, if you can change the. Oh, I just changed my view to gallery there, but okay, perfect. So just to let people know, again, I just did that on my screen, but if you are struggling that you're seeing only one person, or you're seeing the gallery and you want to see only one person, you can always go up in the top right-hand corner and change when you click on the view button. And another thing to let people know is that if you ever want to change any information about your name, again, when you're in Zoom, it's super easy to do that. You can actually, there's 3 little dots in the top right of your picture, and you can always click on that and scroll down to rename, and you can add things in there at any time. That's your little friendly IT message this morning if you want. As you'll see with mine, I do have that CLTO, and then I do have my pronouns next to my name. But welcome everybody. Again, we know that there's more people scrolling in this morning, and there's a couple of distractions within the organization today. And for those of you who are having a tough morning, you probably know who you are. I'm sending you my my thoughts and prayers and good vibes. And for those of you who will have a tough day later today, I hope that you reach out to people that are around you and get some support on that. And to also say that today's session, as I mentioned in some of the past sessions, can be triggering for folks. If you've been through things in your life that this might remind you of, or just trigger some of your emotions. We understand if you need to turn your camera off, you need to take a break. You need to go get a glass of water, but always remember with this sort of stuff that if it does trigger that, you know, you're not alone. You've got supports and resources around you, and you should always reach out for supports. And Community Toronto does have an amazing employee assistance program. You can find that information on SharePoint. And if you do struggle, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, I think, or probably any of the directors to give you a hand in finding any kind of information that can help you with those supports. All right, I see more people coming in. And again, just a reminder to please keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. That way it'll be less distracting for the presenters. We're going to take questions throughout the presentation today, so don't hesitate to throw them in the chat or raise your hand. And EJ will happily grab your questions. And if we miss them, put them in again, and I'll try to grab them in the chat as well if they happen to be there. And feel free to interact in the chat too. I know it's been a pretty vibrant and robust space in a number of the past sessions, so people should feel very comfortable in doing that as well. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, thank you for joining. I'm Angela Bradley. I'm with Community Living Toronto. Most of you here probably know me by now. If you don't, drop me an email or a direct message, and I'm happy to get to know you and let you know what I do in the organization. I have been happy to be hosting a number of things for Indigenous History Month and Indigenous Peoples Day. Today, I think, is going to be a very exciting day for us. And we're going to be discussing Canada Day, what it means to Indigenous people, and how it's a little bit of a complicated conversation. And first of all, I'd like to welcome our host, EJ. And EJ, will you accept this tobacco to speak with us today?
For sure, absolutely.
Wonderful, thank you. And also is something we do when we host sessions specifically for around Indigenous people, we like to have a land acknowledgement, and we have Rebecca Lynn Rennick, who's going to give us our land acknowledgement today. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Angela. Good morning, everyone. So thank you for the honor, privilege, and responsibility. So the land acknowledgement for Toronto. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa. Sorry, I'm struggling this morning. We've had some news this morning, so I'm trying to focus. Haudenosaunee. Where was I? And the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I am also tuning in near the town of Midland, which recognizes that it is located on land which is a traditional and treaty territory of the Anishinaabe people, now known as Chippewa Tri-Council, comprised of Beausoleil First Nations, Ramis First Nations, and the Georgina Islands First Nations. This territory is within the Pre-Confederation Treaty 5 and Treaty 16, and is included within the Williams Treaty of 1923. The town of Midland recognizes that it is located on land which is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the historic homelands of the Métis, and that our town is home to a large and diverse community of Indigenous people. We acknowledge we are gathering today no matter where we are on the traditional territory of Indigenous people. I want to acknowledge the longstanding contributions of Indigenous people in what is now known as Ontario. I want to acknowledge the history of treaty making and note that hundreds of years after they were signed, the treaties between Indigenous people and first settlers remain relevant today. We also acknowledge that we are all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Today, we pay tribute to the ancestors of those African and Indigenous origin and descent. Reconciliation means acknowledging the past, present, and future, working together to achieve respect, trust, and equality, an ongoing process that I am committed to, and we all need to be committed to. I used to be proud Canadian. We had huge celebrations of Canada Pride. I even won multiple competitions for my Canada Pride. I'm no longer a proud Canadian. I'm filled with such sorrow for our Indigenous people. Everything that I thought I knew proved that I knew nothing. My personal commitment is to remain teachable and continue to learn and share what I learn. When we know better, we do better. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And as you'll notice, as we've been doing the land acknowledgements, we've been asking people have been coming forward and offering to do land acknowledgements and really bringing them from a very personal perspective and sharing some of their personal commitments and learnings that they've had along the way. So again, thank you, Rebecca. And now I'd like to formally introduce EJ Kwandibens. I think he's not an unfamiliar face to most of us now. We've really appreciated your commitment to us this month and really helping us along with our journey. And I think there will be many more sessions that we'll be chatting with you now that you're part of our family. We've absorbed you. So EJ Kwandibens, also known as Anakakasik, is a member of the Loon clan and is of Northern Woodland, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, of the Wabadunga White Sand First Nation community, which is part of the Robinson Superior 1850 Treaty region located 21 hours north of Toronto. EJ has worked across many sectors, including education, correctional services, social services, child welfare, and mental health. He advocates the power of change through Indigenous cultural modalities. The values and principles guiding his Indigenous ways of knowing and being stems from intergenerational knowledge transfer. Thank you again for joining us, EJ, and now we'll go on.
Thank you so much. I have a little bit of an allergy cold going on here, so my voice is a little bit raspy. It's probably the most manly sound I'll ever make. So enjoy it. Thank you, everybody and the team for bringing me on board once again, and for that beautiful acknowledgement. Sometimes we forget to pay attention to these land acknowledgements because they just become these scripts, as I mentioned in previous talks before. And oftentimes, a lot of people wonder, well, what do I do with this information? Well, it requires you as a listener, as an ally, a member of community, to place what you're hearing and learning into action. So that might be as simple as having conversations with Indigenous people, might be as simple as educating yourself and researching some information and topics and different things that have occurred in time, whatnot, that affected Indigenous people. It might mean just being present in perhaps local Indigenous events and learning and relearning what you know. Or it might mean descripting what you do know, because as Angela had indicated, and also Rebecca, there are things that have occurred in history that perhaps are not as accurate as we like to believe they are. And so there's where that descripting of that knowledge to really find out the truth of what is and what has happened to Indigenous people. So relearning is always going to be a constant process. And so long as you do that with an open mind and an open heart, I think wonderful, great things will unfold. What I want to do first, because we're here to talk about Canada Day through an Indigenous lens and how it is that we view Canada Day. And I'm sure many of you who are tuning in today will have your own views. Some of you are new guests to the country of Canada. Some of you have been born here in Canada. Some of you may or may not be Indigenous. Some of you may be Indigenous to somewhere around the world. So we're going to have an interesting conversation. I don't plan for these types of talks. I really just have an open dialogue and try to pull the Band-Aid off and try to get into the minds of how you come up with your thought process, how you come up with your opinions on a topic. And this is what we're going to do, because trust me, everyone in Canada has an opinion on this topic. And we're going to talk about it. So before we do that, and as Rebecca and Angela indicated in the beginning, this may be a triggering topic for some of you. And we must all take care of ourselves. Regardless if it's this topic or anything that we engage in life, we must always take care of ourselves. And we must always do our own personal check-ins, right? We do our personal check-ins to ensure that, one, we are okay, and that we are proceeding and engaging and learning in a way that is going to be good. You know, simple as that. We have a term in my language called minugmatizuan, which is living that good life. Doing the check-in to speak truth, to create balance. And that can mean anything to many different people. So in terms of this session today, check in and make sure that you're doing well. And if something is triggering for you, as Angela indicated, there are supports available to you. To know that the conversation today is not a conversation of being self-righteous. It's not a conversation of condemning people. It's not a conversation of shaming anybody. We are all here to learn. And if we learn with that open mind, I think that we can always enrich our learning process moving forward. So at that time, I'm going to light up a smudge. A lot of different belief systems around the world practice certain kinds of smudging practices. Us as Indigenous people in Canada, we have many different forms of smudging. I'm using a cedar stick right now. One of the powerfulest medicine that we have in our territory is cedar. And so it being a woman's medicine, we light up our cedar to prepare our thoughts and our minds to what it is that we're about to engage in, so that we can proceed in that good way. So we can be able to take in the information in that good way, apply what is meaningful, and just leave the rest. And this is what sets the tone. The power of our words and our actions and our thoughts really do have very much energy and power in them. And we must be able to be conscious of that, because we just never know how these words and behaviors and thoughts will affect the person beside you. So let's begin. Today, well, tomorrow will be Canada Day. And for many people, this is a wonderful celebration of the day of the birth of Canada and all that has been for Canada. For Indigenous people, this may not be a day that is widely celebrated. There's many different reasons for that. You know, if you are a newcomer coming to Canada, you come to the country of Canada because it provides or presents a new life, a new opportunity. And it does, it really does. And you should be able to embrace all of that. As I mentioned, this is not a conversation to shame anybody or to be embarrassed of being a Canadian or being embarrassed of being on the soil of Canada. But it also requires all of us to understand truth, to understand the history. Every country around the world has their atrocities and inequalities and injustices of the people in those territories. Canada is no different. And so when we look at Canada Day, we look at the birth of a country, the birth of a country that perhaps was seen in the eyes of the settlers that came off of the shores of it being a free land, an empty land, a land that had no other life present. That story is not accurate. Of course, Indigenous people were always here. We are very much a transient people that traveled with the seasons across the territories, whether it's across the West Coast, North, East, or South into the States. We are transient people that travel with the seasons. And we lived off the land. And some of our old traditionalists still do to this day. And so when we look at Canada Day, I know a lot of my friends in the Indigenous community are very angry, are very much embarrassed, shamed, have absolutely no desire to want to be a part of Canada, while others do. And those that do mustn't be shamed for doing so, much like all of you who are in the call today. You came to Canada for a reason, presented that opportunity, and you're learning and you're understanding the history. Canada is a beautiful country. We have beautiful territories. We have beautiful languages and beautiful nations of people. And so we mustn't forget that. I don't identify as Canadian. And a lot of people probably are wondering why, because you're born in Canada, so therefore you should be Canadian. Well, when we look at Indigenous people being a sovereign nation of people within a sovereign nation, right? So we look at Indigenous people that have always existed within a territory of land that now became the stamp of Canada. And we became the forgotten ones. We weren't included in the process of that acknowledgement of Canada because we were non-existent in the eyes of those of the government. And that kind of really starts to tone into how Indigenous people start to look at Canada and how, for some, celebrate Canada. I haven't celebrated Canada Day for I don't know how many years. It's a conscious choice. It's an individual, personal choice for many different reasons. A lot of my friends speak about how, you know, well, let's backtrack. Last year was really the first year that the society and the people of Canada took a step back. They took a step back because graves of children on residential school properties. We don't sugarcoat that reality. These children were murdered. Hands of the church and the hands of the government. We call it for what it is. And at that time, last year, we were at a number of 213 or 215, I'm sorry. 215 children's bodies were recovered at the Kamloops Indian Residential School property in British Columbia. To this day, we were at 10,000. We don't hear much of this. The nation of Canada was shocked at 215. The world was shocked at 215 discoveries of these unmarked graves. Now we're at 10,000. Think about that for a moment. You can go to a city of 10,000 people and just erase them. What would happen? How would society view that? Right? The viewing of this doesn't surprise our Indigenous communities, because being Indigenous is being, pardon the expression, being on the bottom of the totem pole. We are viewed as lesser than. We are viewed as lesser than the soil that we walk on. And so when we hear crickets around 10,000 unmarked graves of children that are being discovered, this does not surprise us. And so we've taken upon our own to do the work ourselves without relying on the government and policy and politicians to get their PR. But when we look at 10,000 children, there is belief that we're going to reach close to 35,000 children. We've only really hit the tip of the iceberg, because we've only looked at only approximately, I think it was 7 or 8% of the schools in Canada that have discovered that many. We have so many other schools that haven't even been looked at yet. So those numbers will definitely be increasing. Why I'm mentioning this is simply because this is just one component of the reason why Indigenous people in Canada have chosen not to celebrate Canada Day. We have, as I mentioned, residential schools. People are so sick and tired of hearing residential schools, but we will continue telling those stories until we are sick and tired of telling our stories. But the reality is that system is a real system that achieved, to some degree, the goal of getting rid of, quote unquote, killing the Indian. It's the policy that was created in 1847 and endorsed in 1850 by the federal government and the religious orders. And so when we look at that timeline to where we are now, being the last residential school that closed in 1997, I believe it was, or 1996, I believe it was 1997. That is a long timeline of attempting to kill off a people. And that's a very bitter pill to swallow for society to take in. Imagine going to a demographic of people. Let's just throw any type of ethnicity. Let's just say we're going to throw in white folk. Let's take 10,000 of them and kill them. I guarantee it, there would be war. There would be an uprising. There would be a complete shift because of the privilege that white skin carries. Now, if you're white and you're non-Indigenous and you're a white person, I don't want you to feel disempowered and being shamed for your skin, because you don't carry what has happened. This is not of your doing. So I want to be very clear. It's people who have been in power that carry that guilt, that have to do the work of reconciliation. We all have to do to agree of reconciliation, but just know that if you're a non-Indigenous and you're a white person, I'm not pointing the finger at you, but it does require you to stand up and speak up. To be silent is just as bad as being guilty of the ones who've created the harm. So when we look at residential school, and then we look at a new system that came shortly thereafter residential school, the 60s scoop. And I've mentioned this before, but some of you may not know what this is, but the 60 scoop was another policy that was introduced shortly thereafter, mid-reign, toward the latter part rather of residential school when it was at its height, where the federal government adopted to white families. It's a system that succeeded. Many of my friends are 60 scoop. But to know that if you are a 60 scoop, that does not define you, just like residential schools do not define you. And this is why we are having difficulty with those of the 60 scoop who've been adopted out to non-Indigenous families. Some of them were really great families, while others maybe not so much. But the point is that you're adopted into a family that has a different color skin and looks different from you. That does something to a child. You can be loved and nurtured and sheltered and cared for and fed and clothed and get the best education, but something goes on in the minds of someone who's adopted that belong. And that's that individual journey that that individual has to go through. That healing process has to begin. And so the 60 scoop survivors, we're dealing with that a lot today, where those of that system and that policy have started to make way to community. When I say community, I'm referring to the Indigenous community, making connections, recognizing that they are Indigenous, recognizing that what has happened was a result of them being placed into these homes and then them being disconnected from their original communities and their identities and the ceremonies and the language, the customs, the practices. I mean, the list goes on. Tough pill to swallow, especially when you feel disconnected, that you feel like you don't belong. And that's what that policy was intended to do, was to assimilate, strip identity, to make Indigenous people white. Think about that for a moment. To make Indigenous people stripped of their identities, to assimilate and make them white. I can't imagine how the parents must feel having their children taken away once again and never to be seen again. I can't imagine that. I would die as a parent if my child was taken away from me. I just can't imagine. It hasn't happened to me, and yet look at me, crying and tearing. It hasn't happened to me, but I feel it because it's real. It's ingrained in our families. It's ingrained in our nations of people. This is the trauma that we have endured forever. And yet, Canadians say for us to just get over it. You can't get over it. I can't imagine having my child taken away and being told to get over it. No. And yet here we stand tomorrow, with our red, white flags, pondering whether or not we should celebrate. We look at, for example, our child welfare agencies. Indigenous children fit 3 times higher the ratio rate of non-Indigenous children in child welfare agencies. Majority of the transfer monies that go to child welfare agencies, I think we call them children's aid societies, is a huge chunk of money for every head of Indigenous children in care. It's a money-making business. Just another residual face of the 60s scoop, of the residential school system. It's just stamped and packaged a little differently. And so a lot of our children, yet once again, have been taken away. Now let's talk about this for a moment. Children are being taken away today from parents who don't know how to parent. My mother went to residential school and was stripped of her identity. When released at the age of 16, had children, had no concept of how to parent. Right? Many Indigenous folks who've been products of residential school systems have taken on some form of addictions to numb the pain. Then they become parents. The bond of having that connection with the child has been severed because it's been severed to them. So now they don't know how to parent. So we now look at my generation of products of survivors, children of survivors, where a percentage of us have functioned and done the best that we can, whereas there is another portion of our community, of my generation, who has not. And those that who have not continue the cycle of abuse and addictions and poor parenting and living on the streets and homelessness and all that sort of stuff to create the generation that we see today, which is filling up the child welfare system. How can we encourage people? How can we teach and support and lift people up to be good parents if they've never learned that before? That's hard. You can't expect in 30 days a parent, to get it so they can get their children back. It's a very unrealistic expectation and goal that we have in child welfare, to expect a parent who has never known how to parent to know how to parent in 30 days. And if you don't get your children back. And so the children continue to stay in the cycle, continue to stay in the system, and sometimes they age out, and that disconnection of family once again occurs. That's just 3 systems. There's so many other systems that have been in place. We haven't even talked about the institutions, like the incarcerated institutions, jail systems. We haven't talked about any of those kind of things. We haven't even talked about mental health. All of these factors that contribute to where we are now, that were a result of the issues that have been imposed upon us, which was intended to kill us. It's tough. It's a tough conversation. And so now when we look at Canada Day, the Indigenous community pretty much across Canada has made the stand to not celebrate Canada Day, for other reasons of the murdered and missing Indigenous women issues, lack of clean drinking water that the government continues to promise, which each and every political election year that never gets delivered. How the soil in Indigenous territories are high with carcinogens and chemicals that is contributing to high rates of cancer and deformities in the reproductive system because the soil is so disrupted with PCPs and you name it, all these chemicals. And yet we are here to celebrate Canada Day with a smile on our face, knowing that these significant issues have not and continue not to be addressed. Bitter pill to swallow. I always get the same line every time from people. Why don't you just get over it and just kind of just be a part of society? You're Canadian. Well, that's where you're wrong. I'm not. I may hold a Canadian passport because that's been forced upon me. And the title of being Canadian has been forced upon me, but we are a sovereign nation of people. Always have been. So how do we learn to navigate in this beautiful territory that the government of Canada calls Canada? How do we truly learn how to walk side by side, much like the wampum belt teaches us? The two rows that we walk on, Indigenous people and the settlers people. We may agree to disagree on matters, but how do we respectfully walk side by side with one another in that good way? When our federal governments and our provincial governments, our municipal governments, political leaderships continue to refuse to deal with the matters that need pressing matters to be dealt with. They always continue to be put to the wayside. And then we wonder why Indigenous people block roads, block the railways, have protests. The federal government was the one that threw us on territories and called them reservations or reserves or First Nations. They're the ones who created that system. And yet when we exercise our rights on our First Nation territories, the RCMP still comes in and tries to kill us off. I don't get it. You know, when we look at the city of Toronto, for example, and the municipal government that exists here, there are parameters to provincial and federal government where they just can't impose legislation on municipal laws. There's a process that you have to go through. Yet when it comes to Indigenous people in our territories, we are what they call fiduciary bodies of the Crown. We are known as the babies of the Queen. That is the relationship and understanding that we have with the Crown, that we are the babies of the state, and that anything that deals with the babies of the state requires permission from Mummy. Sounds kind of silly, but that's the truth of the matter. And Mummy being the Crown, and the Crown allocates permission to the federal government of Canada to speak on their behalf. And so, again, when we look at Canada Day, it's really hard to navigate through the process of trying to celebrate something when we are not even being celebrated as a people. Very bitter pill to talk about. And I'm sure people who are watching today, you will live your lives. You will leave this session today. You will enter in tomorrow with Canada Day. And I want you to be able to celebrate it. I really do celebrate it in the way that you feel that it is necessary for you. Who am I to tell you not to? But if you choose to celebrate it, it requires you to be conscious, to be mindful of the issues that exist with the Indigenous people here. Again, this was not about shaming anyone. It's about educating people on the truth of what has happened and continues to happen in the very soil that you stand on, which you call Canada. You know, my mom, I asked her, what are you going to do for Canada Day? She laughs. She says, what? What are you going to do for Canada Day? What's Canada? Right? That alone tells me enough of what her position is on this. Yeah, because my mom, I mean, she's an older lady and she's been to residential school. She's experienced all of these things I'm talking about. And it's really hard to reconcile, I'm assuming for her, with the state of Canada, of what it has done and the systems that it has imposed on her and her family with the attempt to kill them off. So it's really hard for her to look at it objectively and say, well, we're going to celebrate this, and we're going to do this and that. You know, one year she said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sit in my lodge in my backyard, make a fire, and cook a feast for the elders and the homeless people in our community. Right? That need to reconnect and that need to support one another. Traditionally, with those old ways, we use food to bring people together, to sit in the lodge and to have conversation. That's what we would always do. That is healing. Most of the people that are the elders in our community are the ones who are homeless, are the ones who've gone through residential school, have gone through the 60s school, who have made reconnection to community, who've gone through child welfare or had children in child welfare who have been taken away and have never come back and been adopted out. These are their stories. These are their truths, and that is what they speak about. And to do that in the lodge, with a pipe ceremony and smudge, fire in the center of the lodge, and just being together and connecting and reconnecting is more meaningful than buying a cake with a white and red flag on it and sitting in your room and listening to the fireworks. That is not meaningful for them, but that sitting in the ceremony in that lodge is more meaningful to them. So I want to continue the conversation, but I want to be able to pick people's brains. I want to be able to answer some questions, perhaps, if anybody has any questions. Let's dive into them. So Angela, if you have any, we can. Wow, that was 45 minutes. That was crazy.
It's amazing how easily we can. I know I could just listen to you forever, and I've said that before. But lots of comments in the chat. Lots of people saying that they're going to choose to wear an orange shirt on Canada Day instead of the Canada Day traditional Canadian flag and such. And you know, I really appreciate that. As you say, EJ, it's I think people can make choices to do what they want to do, but it's going in with eyes wide open, which is so amazing. And I know I've shared on some past calls before about the complications I find for myself, and that my own grandfather wanted to go to war in World War II. And in order to go to war, you had to be a person. And if you were Indigenous, you were not considered a real person. So he had to give up his status and declare that he was now going to be essentially Canadian, no longer an Indigenous member of the Mohawk group, Mohawks of Quinte, and went to war. And when he came back, you know, it was a very, very difficult time. And he began to very much identify or presented his decorated military, very Canadian identity, because he didn't know how to get his other identity back. There were so many barriers So, when you talk about celebrating and doing those things, my grandfather proudly carried the Canadian flag in as part of the color guard and the Legion in Canada Day parades. And, he's long since gone, but I wish I could talk to him about it now.
Yeah, those are those stories that people have lived through. These are those challenges that Indigenous people have had to struggle with in order to, I'm going to use the word very loosely and quote, conform. It was a survival mechanism, right? It doesn't make it right, but that was the reality of those times. To this day, will refuse that they are Indigenous for the fear of what might happen to them and or their children, their adult children, their grandchildren, because the fear was so ingrained in them during those years. It was real. I had mentioned in previous talks where we are not allowed to leave the First Nation unless we had a ticket that said that you were given a pass to leave the First Nation territory for either hunting or fishing or groceries or whatever. And if you did not, you were either shot and killed or you were thrown in jail. And that was not so long ago. That was in the 60s and the 70s, right? So, or even if we had more than 2 or more Indigenous people meeting in a space, they called it an unlawful gathering. And if you didn't have a ticket that gave permission for that, you were shot, killed, or thrown in jail. People don't talk about that. Perhaps people don't know about that. If you spoke your language in society, you would. My God, my mother used to tell me how Indian agents and police officers and white folks would, just passing by, they heard you speaking your language, you were beaten up, right? I mean, my grandfather was murdered by a man in our community who was one. And he was murdered as a result of that. And that man, to this day, walks free. And so what we do as the grandchildren of my grandfather, we remind him we know the story. We remind him of what he did to our grandfather and the shame that he carries, the embarrassment. It's better than him sitting in jail, right? These are those real stories. This is has viewed us as lesser than the soil that we walk on. So if the system is a system that views the people like this, then those who are not Indigenous who follow that system will adopt its ways, and it becomes normalized. Racism and hatred and all that sort of stuff, that ugly beast pokes his head in every aspect of our lives. And we are feeling it still to this day. How many people do we know in society that carry those old views? There is a generation of people that carry those old views of Indian people should be nowhere than shot and put back in the ground or left on the reserve to die. There is a generation of people that think that still, right? I go to Montreal often, and the old French community looks at Indigenous people as dirty scum savage, right? Dirty scum savage, a savage of dirty scum. There are people that think that still. How do we respond? Well, I don't believe lashing out works. We have moments of vulnerability where lashing out perhaps is necessary, and we're human, right? But I always believe in kissing people with that kindness. I always believe in treating them with respect that they are not giving. As long as I could put my head on my pillow at night to know that I did the best and was a better person today than I was yesterday, I am accountable to me, not that person. That person has no understanding of who I am and where I come from and the history that I come from and all that has happened to my people. I mean, look at Quebec, for example. They don't celebrate Canada Day. In fact, July 1st is the day that they've instituted for many years as their moving day, right? Think about that for a moment. It is their moving day to separate themselves from Canada. Indigenous people are the same. We are removing ourselves from Canada for the very reasons I mentioned. But we need to find common ground still. We need to find that space where we have balance. Because we can't continue to operate from a place of anger and hurt and resentment. We can't continue to do that because it will just completely manifest and eat inside one. But that's where the work lies. You know, Angela mentioned about many people will be wearing Orange Shirt Day for the Every Child Matters movement to commemorate July 1st. Some say that July 1st should be an Orange Day. Perhaps, perhaps not. I like to believe that we will get to a time, a place in history where when we do celebrate Canada Day, both Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, when we get to that point, it will be because we finally recognize the need to reconcile together. Well, understanding the truth, understanding the history, and I'm not saying just read it in the textbooks. I'm talking about really understand it, speak about it. All of you who are in this call right now are learning things perhaps that you've never heard before. And to speak up, to speak to the issue. Even if you don't know the entire story of the issue, you can perhaps say, I heard this talk about this situation and this is what I learned. And then when we hear people in community with this horrible mindset of Indigenous people, you have a responsibility to place action and speak up because you now know some of the history, the atrocities and the issues that have plagued and affected our people. We wonder why our people, a lot of my community members are wonderful, vibrant, engaging, contributing society members, both in the Indigenous and the mainstream. But every time a non-Indigenous person comes across an Indigenous person, they always seem to say that you guys can't. Well, let's just say we are very cautious because our people have been poked and jabbed and assessed and interviewed and tested and everything else, that of course we need to be cautious. So when we hear the federal government making promises, we are cautious. We don't go, yay, this is going to happen. No, let's show action, not just words. When we see the discoveries of these bodies happening, most of these discoveries are being led by Indigenous people from the territories, not by the government. And so, you know, as each of these bodies are being recovered and the numbers are going up, it's not just a number. We mustn't forget that. This was a life. This life was a child of someone. And that life has been taken. And there is a whole ceremony that we do in our Indigenous community to bring back the spirit of that individual, to rest them in the place that they need to be rested. These children have been murdered and silenced. My mom used to tell me, my uncles used to see the priests and the caretakers at nighttime hauling potato bags, throwing them in the river late at night. Think about that for a moment. These large potato bags, what was believed to be the little bodies, because these children were not to be seen the next day. We must not to schools, we must check the riverways, the waterways. And so these are the realities that we're dealing with. And those numbers will definitely go up. And so when we look at Canada Day, a lot of our people are removing themselves from Canada for this very reason, until we get to resolution and true reconciliation around this issue of, for example, these children and their bodies being discovered. It's a tough time that we are in. And everybody will process this in their own individual way. Most of our Indigenous people, I've read recently, by the way, a lot of First Nations have posted publicly. For example, a First Nation would write up a BCR or a resolution of some sort, or a notice that says that they are not celebrating Canada Day for this reason. Most of these events that are being celebrated for Canada Day happen to be on Indigenous lands. And so these First Nations are reclaiming those lands and saying, no, we are not celebrating Canada Day. You're not celebrating Canada Day on our territories. Go somewhere else. And so I've seen at least 12 or 13 of these notices across a vast range of territory. And so we're going to see a lot more of this happening. You know, wouldn't it be very interesting if the Mississaugas of Credit, I can't speak on their behalf and I can't encourage them to do this, but as an example, if the Mississaugas of Credit, First Nation, instituted a BCR, a banned resolution policy that states Canada Day practices, imagine that. Every one of the organizations make reference to Mississaugas of Credit in their land acknowledgements. Okay, let's talk about reconciliation. Let's put action into words. You are not permitted to celebrate Canada Day on our territory. Can you imagine the impact that would have? I wouldn't be too surprised. Something to think about. And when it does, you'll say, oh my God, EJ said, no, I'm just kidding. But Angela, any questions or any thoughts or comments?
I see some folks giving huge kudos to you and much gratitude to you, EJ, for joining us again and sharing all of these things. And some folks have also typed some resources into the chat, which is amazing, and are asking about the recording and such. And but it was funny. One of the things that two things that struck me about some of the things that you've been talking about is your phrasing around the forgotten ones, and a group that just wasn't ever asked. They were just pushed into these places and spaces. And I can't help but think about, again, the intersection with the people that we support in community living, having an intellectual disability. And, again, being a group of society that, that we're just in, and it isn't a cultural thing. They were just, taken away and not given a choice. And even now and today, not always given a choice. The other thing that struck me is when you talk about the promises and the promises made and promises not being kept. And I know in the last few years, I learned a lot about Jordan's principle, and I was shocked that as recent as, 2005, I believe it is, that Jordan died in the hospital. And for those who don't know, as you talked about Indigenous folks being the babies of the Queen, Jordan was in the hospital, and they had agreed that he could be released from hospital and could return to his reserve and be with his family. And the three levels of government couldn't figure out whose responsibility Jordan was and who needed to pay for his in-home care, because unlike the rest of us, who you're in Ontario and therefore you are governed by Ontario healthcare, if you're Indigenous, it's not so simple. You're actually the responsibility of the Queen, and you're the responsibility then of the federal government. So nobody could figure out who should pay the bill. And Jordan died in the hospital. He never got to go home.
Mm-hmm.
It's just,
yeah. We're going to see and hear a lot more of those types of situations come to surface, right? I mean, look at the woman who I can't pronounce her last name, was in Joliet Hospital in north of Montreal in Quebec. That case that went on Facebook and went live and whatnot. Again, we're talking about Canada Day and why Indigenous people don't wish or want to celebrate Canada Day. It's because of these systems, and it's because of these scenarios like Jordan principles and the systemic racism that exists in the healthcare system, like the woman in north of Montreal and her story. All of these things, all of these scenarios that exist that have taken place, we put them together. We put them all together, and we can then finally see the pattern and recognize that we are treated so differently in Canada. So why would we celebrate Canada Day if we are not even recognized as human? Right? I mean, our own federal government doesn't recognize us as real people. Yeah, I'm here. And we have our status cards that identify us as a number, but we're not recognized as real people. And that does something to you. It does something to a nation of people. This is why we're seeing an uprising of people, creating change, speaking to these issues. Most of our special guests here that are from different parts of the world and immigrants and new settlers perhaps can relate to some of these stories from where they come from. Our stories are much similar to what you've experienced perhaps in your countries where you come from. We're no different. We may look different, but the stories are similar. We can relate. This is why Indigenous people in Canada, on Turtle Island, in the United States, can relate with the Black community very, very well, can relate to many of the other ethnicities around the world who have been colonized and not viewed as real people. And yet we have to stand here and sing, "Oh Canada," on our native land. How ironic is that? "Oh Canada," on our native land. It's in the song. Right? It's just like an oxymoron. It doesn't sit right. I don't know. But anyways, what do you think?
We do have a question, EJ.
Cool.
Deepak, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead.
It's not really a question. I thank you, EJ, for the really traumatic and certain difficult histories that you talk about, and I can't even imagine the pain the Indigenous people bear and go through, but I can acknowledge that pain, and that's all that I think we can do. Can never be in anyone else's shoes, even though we may say, in a cliched manner, but there were several things that resonated, especially because I'm the other Indian coming from India, right? So we were colonized as well. So we have read those colonial histories in past, and then the white man's burden of civilizing the world unleashed a really gory and really brutal history, and we're all sort of aware of that. But the other things that resonated with me, and especially the kind of anti-colonial struggles that we Indians waged, especially the things that you said, treating with kindness, not lashing out, or, and being accountable to yourself, and building on some common grounds. And all those things resonated with someone that, we definitely celebrate, but is celebrated the world over, Mahatma Gandhi. And one of the strategies that he deployed, and all of those things, treating with kindness, accounting to oneself, not accounting to the other, and building those common grounds. One of the strategies that Gandhi had was to not to resent waging his, what he called the satyagraha, the struggle, the truth, the pursuit of truth, the insistence on truth, satyagraha, that's the Hindi word. In waging that, so he always made that distinction between the systems against which he was waging that satyagraha and the people who were bearing the mantle of that system. He never resented that, and those people. And this was his spiritual, because politics for him was almost an ascetic practice, a spiritual self-journey, accounting to oneself. And that, I think, left us great legacies, great philosophical legacies. And I think that has allowed us to move forward. And I wish you the same as well. So
accurate. And I've been speaking about this for so many times now, so many years, that it is not the people that we should be lashing out or having anger or resentment to. It is the systems and the policies that we must be addressing. Those are what require change, right? At the end of the day, when we look at residential schools, for example, horrible system imposed on us. Religion is a system. In this case, it was the Roman Catholic system, the Anglican, that were the religious orders, that were the predominant religious orders that instituted, or rather implemented, the policy. And so when I look at people who are religious people, I have to do my own personal check-in. I cannot lash out and be angry and show hatred and resentment to someone who is human, who is following a religious ideology. They don't carry the burden of what was done to our people. It is the system that has the responsibility to be, acknowledging one and to change. And so when we look at, for example, Pope Francis, first of all, I don't need no apology from anyone to begin my healing. I'm responsible for my own healing. But I also recognize there are some people that need to see a body figure to hear an apology for them. Everybody's different. But when Pope Francis comes to Canada, for some it will mean a lot. But for me, it doesn't mean anything. For me, it means Pope Francis and the Vatican needs to create real change at the policy level. That's where reconciliation is. I have that mindset. You've already came and dominated our people in this territory, he being the system of the Vatican. we don't need you to come back again. The damage has already been done. If you were going to fix the damage, it would have been done a long time ago. Understand, the compassionate side of me sees the need for some people to have him present. But you're right, systems and policies are the ones that we need to direct our energy at, not the humans, and not to place blame on those. And when we continue to place blame, we are stuck. We can't move forward. You know, there was a time where I would be so angry at religion. If anybody ever talked about religion, I would just lash out. And as I got older and I started learning and realizing how I handle certain scenarios like religion, it wasn't working because I was just still manifesting anger and hatred. And that's not healing. That's just continuing to endure the pain. So our community as a whole, Indigenous people, when we look at that Canada Day celebration, we all have many different understandings and opinions of this. It's such a complex issue that not all of us are on the same page on the issue. Like I said, if I were to give a percentage, I'd probably say there's probably about 80% of Indigenous people are not in favor of Canada Day. The rest are. And I'm also seeing those who are celebrating Canada being attacked by our people for celebrating Canada Day. There's that issue. And it's created such a divide across our nations of people. This is not our way. And we have to return to those traditional ways of knowing and being to create calm, to create that compassion and understanding. We have lots of work to do. This is only our second year of Canada Day coming into this issue of the discoveries of these bodies. And there's much divide, and there's much work to be done, and there is much healing to be done. It's not going to take overnight. Think about it. 1850 was when residential schools was started in full implementation to 1997. It's going to take equally that same length of time for us to have calm where we're above the water with controlled treading ourselves above water. It's going to take that much time. It's not going to be in my generation, but we must continue to do the work and have these continued conversations so that people are aware and that change will happen at the pace that it needs to happen. So thank you, Deepak.
That's wonderful. Somebody said, I read somewhere that policies don't protect people. People protect people. What a great statement, Marian. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions from anybody else in the chat? And thank you, Deepak. That was absolutely a great, stimulated a great discussion and very, very true. It's going to be a long journey. I keep hearing in different areas where they're saying, you know, it's 100 years, 100 years. And, you know, until the pendulum swings. And, you know, as you said, it won't be our generation, EJ, but we can hope that for future generations. Oh, I think you're on mute. Why are you on mute?
I don't know. It's telling me to shut up already. We have, I think I mentioned this before, about that philosophy of Nungam, of how we are the result of those 7 generations behind us that have done the work. Our responsibility in the now is to live and to continue the momentum moving forward so that the next 7 generations ahead of us will have the benefit, we're hoping, of what we've done today, of which I would never meet, right? So it's all about being in the present moment and all about being able to create that change and awareness now. You know, people always talk about, oh, you know, I don't know what to do, or, you know, I'm bored. You know, that's a term that our elders always talk about when people say, I'm bored. Well, how dare you slap your ancestors in the face by using that word bored? They have done the work to create your reality today.
Wow.
And so to say that you are bored means you are not honoring your original teachings, which is to live. Right? So, you know, we have that same philosophy, and it's not going to take 20 years, 25 or 30 years or 50 years. It's going to take a lot longer for us to finally have some normality.
Absolutely. So there's a great question in the chat now. The apology is the lowest on the lowest bar toward truth before reconciliation. However, do you see it as something to build on, since the silence and dismissiveness has perpetuated and festered for so long?
I guess the question is the apology genuine? Right? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Indigenous people are very much cautious of apologies or policies or anything that's being introduced to us. So we're very, very cautious. I hate to say that we're very pessimistic, because to be honest, it's the same end result. Nothing is the same and moving forward and progressing. So it's hard to be positive. I think an apology is going to mean an individual thing to different individuals. For me, apology is, part of my language, crock of shit. Because it hasn't done anything. It hasn't meant anything. There hasn't been substance to it. There hasn't been action to it. You know, we have this understanding that when you go to ceremonies and you're learning a teaching, the teaching doesn't stop by you sitting and listening. The teaching is only started when there is action to it. And if you don't have the action to it, it is a lost, missed opportunity of that teaching. It's the same thing with an apology. If it's just words with no substance and action, it's just words. So that's my take on it. Maybe people will disagree with me, and that's okay.
I think it's funny because as a kid growing up, and I'm hoping others here had this, their moms echoing in their heads when you said that, you know, you do something as a child and you very quickly would just say, I'm sorry. And it felt like a reset button.
Yes.
And until eventually your parent, my mom, would say to me very clearly, she's like, stop apologizing unless you're going to do something about it. Like, if you aren't going to change, you don't get to keep apologizing, you get a reset button.
Yeah.
You know, and it's amazing that, as you said, in society, these big, grandiose apologies are people on their journey away from trauma. Those apologies are significant and have an impact. But you know, I would say that I'm similar to you in feeling that, you know, put your money where your mouth is, folks, and you know, do something. Actions speak louder than words.
There is this teaching, and I'm wearing it right in front of you right now. What you see is a loon, and it's a representation of the teaching that we have, which represents the canoe teaching, where, being that I'm from the Loon clan, we are known to be who we are in terms of our roles in community, educators and that sort of stuff. But the canoe teaching speaks about how, if we're looking at Canada Day and the apologies and all the atrocities and all the issues that existed to Indigenous people and where we are today, the canoe teaching teaches us that we venture down that river. And the canoe represents our life. So we're venturing down this river, and sometimes we come across calm waters. And we enjoy the scenery, we take it in, we have our moment to reflect, but then we come across very swiftly, very carefully, very fast current. And the current starts shifting the canoe. And that canoe starts to get very wobbly, where at times you're going to capsize, and you try to gain control. And then suddenly you come across different aspects of the river where you were navigating through many different ways, where it's very turbulent and rough, then it becomes calm again, and then rough again. And when that canoe beaches to the shore, it means that your life has now come to an end. Not when the canoe capsizes. It's when you come to the shore and it beaches. That is when your life has ended. The point of that story is that we have come across many turbulent times on that river. We've had many different beautiful calming moments on that river in life. This is one of those turbulent times of the current that we are in. Canada Day, and all that goes along with that, the discoveries and the policies, and the atrocities and injustices, these are those turbulent currents that are rocking our canoe. Our job isn't over, our life isn't over until we beach to the shore, which means we must continue to paddle our canoes to create a normal smooth ride, or to gain control so we don't capsize. When we capsize, that is the time that we have even more difficulties, but we haven't reached the shore yet. And so I like using that analogy because it applies to life in general. And that's where we're in right now. We are in those turbulent currents right now. And they're not going away anytime soon. It's how we respond to it that's going to be key, right? We could ignore it. We could just say it doesn't exist and that's fine. Or we can deal with it head on and try to come up with solutions moving forward, right?
Absolutely. I think that Shayla, you've said it quite well in the chat where you just said such eloquent sharing. It's absolutely true, and I really appreciate you joining us today, EJ, and having such an open and vulnerable conversation. And I thank everybody here for being open and vulnerable. And I know many of you quite personally that are here today, and I know that you've all got stories. You've all come from different places and spaces, and I'm sure that the conversation today wasn't easy and has probably made you think a little bit differently about some things, and even reflect on some parts of your own life. And I appreciate everybody coming and being willing to do that. And I love that, as you said, EJ, however you choose to celebrate or not celebrate or reflect tomorrow, it's you, but it's up to you. And but it does bring with it an obligation to kind of think about what it means to live in Canada and that ground you walk on. And I saw a story the other day, and it talked about somebody encouraging people to take your shoes off and feel the ground beneath your feet, and really think about where you are and whose lands you're on, and the meaning of those lands. And I like your story now, and it makes me want to go put my feet in the water and think about that as well, and maybe get out a canoe. So really think about the beauty of this country and our First Peoples and everything we've talked about today. So
yeah, thank you so much for listening, everybody, as well. And you mustn't feel guilty or shamed for celebrating whatever you wish to celebrate, however you wish to celebrate. That's not what today's conversation was about. And just enjoy and be aware and open your eyes, open your ears, and open your heart. When you do that, that's when the real change occurs. That's when growth and healing occurs. And I think we could all benefit from that. So thank you.
Thank you. And again, as I'm learning more about my own people, thank you very much. Now Agoa. Everybody have a really great day.
Igwaj, Mama P.